I'm Greg Myre, Parkway Central, class of 1978. And when I think back to my high school days, I think the thing that was most important or most valuable to me was a sense of the wider world that Parkway gave me. In my high school yearbook, I wrote what I wanted to do. And they asked that question, and I said, to see the world. And that's exactly the kind of vague, fuzzy thing you write when you're 17 and you have no idea of what you want to do. But I took it as sort of a legally binding commitment that I was obligated to follow, and so I spent 20 years of my adult life as a foreign correspondent going around the world with the Associated Press and the New York Times, all over Africa and Asia and the Middle East and the former Soviet Union. And I trace a lot of that back to Parkway, some of the great teachers I had in English and social studies who did give me that wider sense of the world.
That's fantastic. Now, when did you start in Parkway?
I came in 7th grade in the spring of 1973 at Parkway Central Junior High, so I went there for 2 years and change, and then 3 years at Parkway Central Senior High School.
And was there anyone in Parkway that specifically inspired you? You said that they helped you feel more worldly, but is there anyone in specific?
Yeah, I'd cite, well, I could give a whole bunch of people, but I would say that I had, looking back, even at the time I knew, but especially looking back, 3 English teachers. My 9th grade English teacher, Mr. Hamra, and then his wife, Mrs. Hamra, who I had in 12th grade, and Mrs. Zewide, who I had in 11th grade. And all 3 of those teachers, I think, really taught so beautifully. They gave you an interest in the written word and literature, big ideas, and taught you to write and to be precise and to revise, and really pushed you and stretched you. And those, I think, those 3 teachers and their classes were extremely memorable. And I ended up working in journalism. So at that time, I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't even know that I enjoyed writing so much. But I felt they were awakening something or touching something and pushing you to think and stretch yourself and do something that I hadn't done before. So I look back on that very fondly and can draw a very direct line from what I do today to what they inspired in me.
Well, it certainly did catapult you into your career. Can you share a little bit about that?
Right. So when I got out of college, I had figured out I wanted to be a journalist, and I got hired by the Associated Press in Washington. And then I figured out pretty quickly I wanted to go overseas. I thought, what could be more fun than to have somebody pay you to go around the world and cover amazing events? And so I did that for 2 decades. Got to see some incredible things. I got to see Nelson Mandela walk out of prison, Cape Town, South Africa in 1990, and then the final years of apartheid is when I was working for the Associated Press there. I was based in Pakistan but working in Afghanistan in the mid-90s and interviewed this small new radical group that was fighting its way toward Kabul, and this was the Taliban. And before anybody really knew about them, I got to meet these guys, talk to them, and get a sense of what we're still seeing to this day. In Moscow, I was there for 3 years, and right as I was finishing my tour in 1999, this young, secretive, former KGB agent was becoming the leader of Russia. His name was Vladimir Putin. He's like, who is this guy? What do we know about him? Is he just going to be another Russian prime minister who lasts for 6 months and then disappears? And no, here we are 17 years later, and he's one of the most important figures in the world. So the chance to sort of see some of these really monumental events and these important events was the real thrill of what I got to do for 20 years. And now I'm in Washington. I work with National Public Radio, and I get to do it a little bit vicariously. We have a field team of about 20 foreign correspondents around the world, and I work with them and help them develop their stories and edit their stories. So I get to continue on doing what I used to do, but now as the editor instead of the reporter.
Well, you've come a long way with that. Parkway is now has a lot more diversity within its school system. Is there any advice you can give students as they are embarking on their education and to the outside world?
Yeah, I mean, talent comes from everywhere, and I think that's one of the lessons I learned going around the world. And you never know where you're going to meet the most extraordinary people, the most talented people, or a better way of doing things. Parkway was great. It was a pretty homogenous group when I was going there now. And I got a chance to go back to the high school and see that it's a more diverse group now. And I think that only strengthens the place and makes it better and gives a broader perspective. And that was the thing I really appreciated, is I got to go out in the world and see things of like, wow, this is a different way of doing things, but that's interesting, and that's maybe different, maybe a little better. Just a different way of looking at the world, and it's just the way that opens your mind and broadens your mind. And the only way you can do that is by going places. And my sort of guiding philosophy is too grand a term, but it was sort of, 90% of life is just showing up and just getting to these places and talking to people. You discover things, not only that you learned about the world, but you learned about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, can you share a little bit about what this award means to you, being part of the Parkway Hall of Fame?
Oh, well, it's an absolute thrill and a real honor. And I think one thing I thought about was everywhere I went during all these years abroad, if you go back and sort of looked at the scrapbook of my life, you'd see me there with a red St. Louis Cardinals cap on in South Africa, and a navy blue cap on in Afghanistan, and a tan cap on somewhere else. And there was more than just the change in my personal style there. I always remember trying to, from what I'd learned in high school, to my English teacher, saying, you got to think, who's your audience? Who are you writing for? Who are you telling this story to? It can't just be everybody. You got to think about somebody. And that hat was a reminder of where I was from, and I would be thinking about if you're waking up and you're in Chechnya and you're trying to say, what am I doing here? What story am I writing? Who am I talking to? And it literally, when I put that cap on, it made me think, I'm writing for friends and family and people I know in St. Louis, and Parkway was a big part of that. So it really gave me a sense, it grounded me, and no matter where I was always had that little point of reference, and that was very important to me.